Rosa Parks didn't sit down on the bus one day because she was tired and didn't want to go up to the back of the bus. Everyone knew that she had been part of the civil rights movement for years, marrying someone active in the NAACP and working as a secretary for the Montgomery chapter. She was part of a concerted effort for civil rights for decades before the Montgomery bus boycott was successful and paved the way for civil rights. Nor was she the first black woman to refuse to get up. Claudette Cloven, a youth at 15 years old, also refused to give up her bus seat. She was sitting with some friends who sat with her, and then they went up to the back of the bus when they were asked, but she refused until she was arrested, yelling at the white police officer that she had her constitutional rights. While the NAACP bailed her out, they hemmed and hawed whether they should not use her as a test case or as somebody to organize a boycott around. At that time, they were playing respectability politics, using black people that would be completely non-threatening to the white people to prove their point that we all deserve civil rights and respect. Claudette says that people thought maybe she was a little too black. She was from the poorest section of town. Her parents didn't have respectable jobs. She became pregnant by a married man when she was 15. So the strategy to appeal to middle-class white sensibilities and a boycott around Claudette could not do that, but a boycott around Rosa Parks did. At the same time, they did choose to use her as a test case, and she was one of the 5 women whose case of discrimination on the bus arose to the Supreme Court, and it was a successful ruling against segregation on this case that ended the Montgomery bus boycott. Claudette was a youth fighting against racism in the system, a youth that many others would pass over. She did not give up, and she did not begrudge Rosa Parks for being hailed as the mother of the civil rights movement. Claudette knew that there was fame, but also knew that Rosa and she had something much deeper: community. A lot of times we're taught history as an individual events. Over here, suddenly, Rosa Parks suddenly refuses to give up her seat. Over there, Martin Luther King Jr. gives a speech. Then, Malcolm X started saying some radical things. Whitney Young Jr. was a black civil rights organizer with the Urban League, and as someone who went to the First Unitarian Church of Omaha and the Unitarian Church in Atlanta. And he was able to get President Johnson to pass legislation that helped the black community that had routinely been impoverished. However, all of these people were deeply connected with one another. They knew each other, prayed together, and built a strong community that fought for civil rights for over 50 years before they saw any policy progress on their goals. If we have the aims to do the same thing, to build a world in which we are all free, then we've got to do the same thing. We have to build community and share a common reality about what is actually going on in the United States today. Once a man was complaining to me about Black Lives Matter. He didn't think we should care that much about the suffering of black people, especially because, hey, haven't we all suffered? He wanted to tell me that during the 70s, when he was just a white kid walking down the street, he had been beaten up by 3 black guys for no reason, just for being white. That he didn't deserve it at all, and why haven't black people taken responsibility? He wanted black people as a group to take responsibility for this crime committed against him. So I wholeheartedly agreed with him. I think we could all use some more responsibility, I told him. Let's hold all black people responsible for him getting beat up 40 years ago. And let's hold all white people responsible for the KKK that quickly formed after the end of the Civil War. How can we, I asked him, as white people, be more responsible about the mass lynchings and fear we have caused blacks for centuries? Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote that in the case for reparations, white families on average have 6 times the wealth of black families, because ever since slavery has ended, white people have managed to steal the wealth of blacks or deny them equal opportunity. Blacks never got the 40 acres and a mule that they were promised after the Civil War. They got incarceration. They never got the housing that most soldiers got after World War II. They got segregated into ghettos. They never got the education they were promised after the Brown versus Board of Education. They got white flight from inner cities. Schools have failed to integrate. Now, this is not to say that black people haven't prospered, as today there is a large black middle class, and black women are the most educated segment in our population. And this is not to say that white people have not suffered at all, and that we should forget about them to help out black people. But working on racial justice is the tide that lifts all boats. The programs that help the black community help everyone. The food stamp program that President Johnson started as part of the plan that Whitney Young Jr. pushed is one that my own family benefited from. When my parents were living in the trailer park, my mother got the formula for me from the Women, Infant, and Children program, or WIC program. If Whitney Young hadn't pushed for food for poor people, and especially for black people, would I have starved as an infant in the 80s? Even as recently as 2013, the majority of people who get food stamps is a white rural woman. So let's talk about responsibility. I told this man that I am sick of white people talking about how black people should be more responsible. I asked him, when are white people going to be more responsible? The phrase of Black Lives Matter started not as a movement to abolish the police, but as a love letter. When George Zimmerman was acquitted in the death of Trayvon Martin, Black Lives Matter wasn't a call to kill all white men or abolish the system or get rid of the police. Alicia Garza instead wrote a love note to the black community, and that note ended with, "Our lives matter, Black Lives Matter." It wasn't a bold social statement designed to make white people feel uncomfortable. I think you're only uncomfortable with it if you're uncomfortable with blackness. It's a deep value to say that even though Trayvon Martin died a young boy, completely innocent, his family will never have justice, that his life matters to the black community. White people were threatened by the idea that Black Lives Matter. All lives matter, they responded, which doesn't make sense to counter with, because if you really believe that all lives matter, then you don't have a problem with the black ones asserting that they do when they are facing genocide on the street with the police. The Obama years have been the safest ever for police, and instead of paying attention to these facts, people started replying that, oh, well, blue lives matter, which again doesn't make sense if all lives matter. As John Halstead says, if you find that the statement Black Lives Matter bothers you, but not blue lives matter, then the operative word you have a problem with is black. Victim blaming, at its core, is blaming the least powerful in the system for the situation set up by the powerful. The victim blaming is all over our political system. We say it's a migrant person's fault for coming over to the United States, and deny the fact that our president and Congress passed the North American Free Trade Act, or NAFTA, which gutted the economy of Latin America and especially the agriculture of Mexico. That worked great for our corporations to get cheap labor. While meatpacking companies that I knew in Omaha, Nebraska would advertise in Mexican newspapers to tell them that people could come over to the United States for a better job, the white meatpackers who lost their $24 an hour jobs to Mexicans working the same job for $12 an hour, guess what? They blame the Mexicans, and not the companies, and not the politicians who made it easier for companies to lower their labor costs. This is like blaming women for wearing clothes that are too revealing or being too drunk, instead of blaming men who take advantage that most rape cases are not reported and a culture believes his word over hers. Like President Reagan blaming gays for loving each other instead of his own inaction to find a cure, causing the unnecessary death of 3 million people from the AIDS disease from 1980s to 2003. The symptom of blaming the least powerful in the system for the problems that the powerful create is a politics we are living in right now. Once you start looking for it, you will see it everywhere. Trump has made things different in the fight for civil rights. Respectability politics of yesteryear, the choosing of Rosa Parks over Claudette Colvins won't work because Trump isn't going to put up appearances. When I was growing up, my grandparents told me that black people like Southerners better like them because Southerners did not put up appearances. They would just say, look, Mexicans don't work as hard as black people on the farm, so we want to hire black farm hands. They said that black people like this honesty with them because, well, Yankees always lie and say that they liked everyone the same, but you could tell they were just as racist as any Southerner. Trump, a Yankee himself, has fashioned himself after this. He said he's just saying what the liberals are actually doing. I also don't know if Southerners are more racist than Yankees because they're more blunt about it. I just know that this is the emotional reality, the perception that Trump was able to win on, and we have got to be real about this. Another thing that is different for civil rights right now than during Rosa Parks' time is that the truth does not matter as much. We are living in a post-fact society where emotional realities, like the police being afraid of Black Lives Matter, is more real to whites than the fact that the police are safer than ever before and that black people are dying from modern-day lynching. See where this emotional reality of victim blaming takes place, or the emotional reality that liberals are liars in a world in which we are all racist. We must appeal to these emotional realities and create better ones. We cannot dismiss things that we think are ludicrous out of hand. We must treat things that we think are insane calmly and explain it, because a deeply divided America reflects that we no longer share the same reality. Being hysterical about something or dismissing it out of hand only confirms biases of elitism and us being out of touch. This is how I've gotten my family, who thinks that liberals are lying about racism, to support the same reality that the facts actually support. It took 10 years, and sometimes in these debates with them I was wrong too, but I talked to them, and every time I would just bring up calmly and matter-of-factly that segregation does not work in a society where people are free to marry from other ethnicities and able to adopt children with different colored skin than their own. About how pluralism and diversity brings us strength and economic wealth, and anyone who is not supportive of that, either in words or deeds, is trying to divide us so that they can make money. It was painful and slow going, but it worked, and my family did not need to go to college to get it either. What we must do is hold the powerful accountable and stop blaming those who can do nothing about it. Stop thinking that the individual hero will just pop up in the nick of time, and start relying on a community to make a world that we dream about. We need to recognize our own power instead of denying it, and seize it instead of critiquing it. We can follow the example that Black Lives Matter has set. When Alicia Garza wrote that love letter, she was not wanting to start a movement. Being lesbian and black, she wanted to diffuse power and have communities that were different rise up with their own voices, whether those voices belong to queer people, young people, uneducated people, pregnant teenagers, people who were deeply black, or other people of color. Instead, people came together in communities to learn what to do if someone they knew was killed by the police in their area. So we too must organize on the issues that we care deeply about. I know it's information overload right now with all of the things that could possibly change. It's hard to know what to do. So think to yourself, what of all these proposed changes will affect you the most? What will affect this community the most? If you're an employer that relies on the work of workers who are on deferred action or DACA, then you need to speak to our legislators directly about the need for DACA. If you are a teacher who is trying to teach but it is difficult to because most of your students are afraid of being deported, you need to speak directly about how you need to protect your students. If you have a pre-existing condition and the repeal of Obamacare will kill you because you can no longer afford treatment, then you need to let our representatives in government know this. It's good to lend solidarity to other communities so that they can organize on what is most important to help them and help them when they ask it. But don't forget that you have needs as well that will be affected by the coming changes. You need to know what you need in order to live, and find the other people who are going to be affected in the same way. Bypass politics and slogans, gather your people and build your community. From there, you can build the power of your own collective experience. James Baldwin writes that the role of the artist is exactly the same as the role of the lover. If I love you, I have to make you conscious of the things that you do not see. I tell you what, I think black people love this country a whole lot. In each generation, they make us conscious of the things that we do not wish to see. In the Negro spiritual tradition, there's a theme of getting free built on the legacy of slavery. And it is time still now for us to be free of the illusions and delusions that we tell ourselves that keep racism intact. African Americans mean it now as much as they meant it back when whites were enslaving them. Martin Luther King Jr. preached that we are all bound up together in a common destiny, and that if people of color are not free, then white people are not free either. White people, we are called to share the same reality as people of color, to bring us all together from the things that we need the most, so that we can all get free.